But then it tends to get forgotten that when you move to this new space, you need to make some internal changes. What's up, y'all? Welcome to Random Wednesdays on Gratified Grad, where it's my goal to help you graduate with gratification. My name is Letitia, and in today's video, we're going to talk about internal changes and external changes and how they should complement each other. So when I talk about internal changes, I mean things like the way you think, the way you respond in situations, how you choose to interpret things and stuff like that. And by external changes, I mean your environment, right? So what can you see? What is in your tangible reach of things? So an example of this is graduate school, right? So you come to graduate school, you're either you're changing environments, whether that's from undergrad or from the workforce to coming back to graduate school. So the external changes that are around you is that one, you may be living in a new area. You may be in a new home. Three, it's just the people who are around you may be different. And so, these are external changes that are occurring, and you have to come to adapt internally in order for the external changes to take place, right? In order for you to be able to survive and thrive in this new environment, which is the external changes. And so coming into graduate school, for me, I was coming right out of undergrad. I did have a little work in a laboratory as a research tech. Once again, it was not that long. So, I say that I hadn't gotten into any type of work long enough to have, a non-school mentality. But even then, coming from undergrad to graduate school, it's still a change, right? So I moved from the South, the deep South at that, to the middle of Pennsylvania, in which some of the external changes that I experienced was food. The food was much different for me. The way that people act here was a bit different for me, and the weather was different for me. And so these external changes, I had to then turn around and reflect internally, how am I going to change my surroundings and react to this? So with the food example, I learned how to cook. I cooked recipes that reminded me of home. I used my own seasonings, and that was my internal response to this external change, is that, I realized, okay, if I want to feel the same way that I felt home when eating dinner, I need to cook the foods that I am used to eating. In terms of the weather, I really had to prepare my mind for the fact that it was going to be cold, like really cold. And that, the sun wasn't going to be out. Like, I had to keep all these things in mind. So mentally, I really had to do some preparation. And, also be open and accepting to the fact that this is a new environment. That overall is the largest internal change that I had to make coming to graduate school, is to be open, right? To have the ability to say that, this is going to be different. This is going to be a new experience, but it's okay. And then in terms of graduate school, right? So the work and what that looks like. Oh, man. So, just on top of the fact that I am in my 20s, right? I was in my early 20s when I started graduate school. And, still figuring myself out, figuring out what my, things that I like, things that I dislike, as well as trying to figure out how I learn, so it was a lot of internal change. It was, like I said, the external changes was like the food, the weather, the people. But in graduate school, a lot of the work is internal. And so something that really helped me with this internal, external, making them complement and reflect each other is I had to start implementing. So before, I was very lackadaisical, where it just worked out for me, right? Like I never really had to work hard for things. I worked for them, but most of the stuff came pretty easy. It was something that I wanted to do. I tried it once and I was fairly successful at it. So it wasn't that large of a struggle for me. But then coming here, everything was just brand new. And so just everything was a struggle. But I did say that I did a good job at keeping going when I first started grad school, but it was a large internal adjustment that I had to make. The stress is high in grad school, so things that I used to just allow to fester and allow to just happen or sit around, I couldn't do that anymore. Like I had to handle the frivolous things. And by frivolous things, I mean like, if there's something, like I don't like clutter, but more often than not, the stress in me isn't that high. So I can deal with having a little clutter and no problem at all. Well, now, I've gotten deeper into graduate school and it's become more stressful, I realized that, okay, you know what? I know I don't like clutter, and I also know that I need to do something about that clutter right now. So I now make sure that I keep my space area pretty decluttered, and that helps with my stress levels, and it helps with just this difference of environment and managing the stress. So yeah, the internal changes should complement the external changes, or vice versa. Sometimes you get the external change first, and so then you have to figure out how your internal changes can complement the external changes. And so an example of how, if the internal change came first and then you had to kind of move your life around externally to complement that, let's say, for example, my room. So I came to realize that there are 3 makeup products that I use. And so out of the, though I have more, there are really 3 that I mainly use. And so what I do now is I have this it's a cute little square dish type thing. And I just sit the 3 products that I use on a regular basis on this square dish, and it's right next to my mirror. And so that way, there's minimal effort for me to just put on the makeup, right? Because the internal change that I had is when I record videos, I want to make sure that I'm wearing some type of makeup. And the complementary external change is to make it easier for me to apply the makeup, so that way I'm more likely to put it on. Whereas if you have the external change first, and you need to figure out internally how you're going to do. So that the example of that is graduate school, right? So my external change was moving from the south to the north. And so internally, I had no idea how I couldn't internally adjust to coming to graduate school. So it's one of those things where I just had to wait for that external change to happen. Of course, there were some things that I could do to, get ready, like, watch YouTube videos, talk to other graduate students, that kind of stuff that I could do mentally, get myself ready, read up on the area, figure out what the weather is like, what stores, possibly look at the map of the university to get a understanding of the layout. But as far as the day-to-day moving, I had to make that external change before I could figure out how I mentally would respond to this external change. And so, coming into graduate school, I got here and I just kind of got into my routine, let that happen. And then I figured out what parts, and this is where the internal change is coming in, right? Is I figured out what is what are the thought processes do I need? Like, what kind of mental space do I need to be in? The perfect example is studying. For me, as a grad student, I like to study either early in the morning or really late at night. Not sure why, but like middle of the day studying just wasn't a thing for me. And that was an internal change that I had to realize, because in undergrad, I didn't really study all the time. I studied a little bit, but definitely not to the extent in which I learned to study in grad school. So I think that what gets most people is when you have that external change first. Because when you have that external change first, it's easy for you to recognize that you've now changed your position or you've now moved your location. But then it tends to get forgotten that when you move to this new space, you need to make some internal changes in order to fit with the external changes that you've made so that you can adapt, thrive, and survive. So just some thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we can have more conversation about this.